What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another live stream here on the Sergeant Tank YouTube channel. Thanks so much for stopping by. We have another special guest live stream with you guys, and that is going to be Josh with Cunningham Cichlids. All of the links and everything down for you guys in the description below. And I even put in chat for you guys. He was generous enough to go ahead and do 10% off his website on your order, utilizing the promo code STL, so like Sergeant Tank Livestream 10 for 10% off. And if you guys enjoy this type of content, I do encourage you, do me a favor, go ahead, hit the subscribe button, put on post notifications so you get all notifications. And without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce Josh. So I'm going to turn the camera over to you, my man.
All right. Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate you having me on your live stream. So my name's Josh Cunningham. So I run a business called Cunningham Cichlids. I've been breeding African cichlids for well over 20 years now. Started keeping fish back in '96 when I was in the service still. I got into, and actually my first cichlids were not African cichlids. They were Jack Dempsey's and Oscars that I threw in a couple 20-gallon tanks that I later learned that wasn't the right environment for them. So I basically did a no-no and bought fish without doing research. So now I learned a lesson. You do all your research before you go procure your fish is the right way to do it. So ended up getting rid of those, Jack Dempsey's and Oscars. Before I got out of the service, I found what was known to be now a Frontosa, was Sinothlopia gibberosa from Lake Tanganyika. So right there, I fell in love with Lake Tanganyikan species. So I knew I had to have those. So then I started doing more research and went down the road of keeping African cichlids. So I started out breeding with about 8 tanks in my other house, pseudo fish room, finished basement type deal. And then we ended up moving, upgrading our house, and I sold everything off and started over. I used to breed fish for a local shop and trade in the fry for filters and food. Used to take them in Ziploc bags. I didn't even know they made fish bags to transport fish. So learned a lot since then, that's for sure. Okay, so like any fish room, one thing you want to do, and I drew up plans originally when I started to put my fish room in. So I have my fish room in my basement. It's a 1,100 square foot fish room. Originally, it was just going to be half of that, so about 550, 600 square foot. But once I started keeping cichlids again, I went on Craigslist. I got the bug, the multiple tank syndrome, we all call it if we're in the hobby. And started just buying tanks after aquariums and set them up in my basement. So once I set up on the right side of my basement, which was originally my fish room was going to be on the left side of my basement. I was going to build the wall, finish it all and everything. I ended up setting tanks on the right side. I decided I'm not going to go through and move all those tanks. I would just make the whole basement my fish room. So currently I have 94 tanks in my fish room. They range from smallest being 15 gallons to the largest being 180 gallon. Originally, I had 140 tanks a year and a half ago when I was really heavy into Lake Tanganyikan cichlids, because you can do a lot of them in small aquariums, as you know, if you keep shell dwellers or Julies. But then I migrated now back into more Haplochromis and more Lake Malawi, Lake Victoria cichlids, where I actually started breeding fish back in '96. So my fish room has been a growing evolution over the last, I think, 6 years now. I've learned a lot over that time period. One thing I preach, and if you've seen my fish room talks or if you're a local club and I come give you a talk, one thing I preach now is make sure you do your planning up front and make sure you stick to it. I've redone my fish room probably 5 times in the last 6 years between moving tanks in, taking them out, painting tanks, reconfiguring my room. And I finally just did my final remodel, so my room is pretty much set the way it is. So my next project that's up and coming is to put in an automated water change system on 65 of my tanks that I have set up mainly for grow out tanks and some 40 longs, 40 breeders for breeding. So everything today is all manual water changes. So imagine when I had 140 tanks down there, manually water changing every tank, several tanks a night. It was a 7-night-a-week job. And this is not my full-time job with fish. I also work full-time for a automotive company. So this is what I do on the side as another business that I started up. Yeah, so my plan with that is I'm gonna have to actually never drilled a tank before, but I've seen, obviously you watch videos on YouTube, you've seen it done. It doesn't look to be too hard, but my plan is gonna be to empty all those tanks and come down and drill them all. What I put in, I worked with John at Gemco. He was very helpful with helping me and guiding me through what I needed. So considering I'm only drilling 275s and the rest are all 40-gallon and smaller tanks, 40s and 20s and a couple and 10-15s. I went with 3/4 inch bulkhead on, so those will be on the inside, and I'm going to do a 1/2 inch drain holes on the outside. So I'll drill probably 1/2 inch down from the trim and 1/2 inch over, probably on the right side of each tank, and then take them down, empty them, and then drill them and set them back up. I'll put 1.5 inch drain lines in PVC that's going to run all behind my rack. That I'll drill holes in the PVC, and I got grommets from Gemco as well to hook the 1/2 inch hose to the other side so it all drains in the PVC. Now my only concern is to drain all that water down my sump pump, so I'm trying to look at ideas of how do I expel that water out of my basement without using my sump pump. So the way my room's filtered is it's all filtered on sponge filters. There is some hang on the back, so I do use some Title 110s on my tanks that are 6 foot or bigger. And I do have sponge filters in there as well. I just feel the Titles actually help with the water movement, and the fish I have in there are bigger fish, so I want to over filter those tanks for them. So my air system, currently I run 2 Alita pumps. I run an Alita AL200, that's my main pump, so that runs over 75% of my room. And then I run an Alita 80 that runs the other 25% of my room. So the way the room is designed is all the pipe is 1 inch. I have bulkheads pretty much installed, so I can cut my system into 10 different pieces if I need to. So I could divert air. I have 3 pump stacks, 3 pump stations. So I have an AL200, which is my main. I have an AL80, and then I have another spot on my fry rack with an AL120 that's not running, but I could run it if I need to. And then I did my system. I divided it with ball valves. So if my AL200 ever went down and I had to rebuild it, I could plug in my AL20s and then switch the ball valves around to do like 50-50 on my room to make sure I could keep all my tanks still filtered while I worked on rebuilding my pump or replacing my pump if something happened. So pumps run anywhere on that size, $500 to $600 from a cost standpoint. And then I probably have spent $1,000 or more on some pumps, but you need that as a backup. If you go buy a pump to run your fish room, you need a backup pump. In case something happens, so your tanks aren't without filtration, because you will lose your fish over a day period, depending, or a couple days, depending on how they're stocked. If you're lightly stocked, you have a little bit more time than if you stock them very heavy. But you want to make sure that you always have a backup pump in case something happens.
With regard to rack systems, I know my thoughts on this, but I want to see your take on customized rack systems or more manufactured type rack systems. So let's say go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Menards, or even order them online. What is your thoughts?
So I know a lot of people do use the manufactured rack systems, as you mentioned, from Lowe's and Home Depot. Personally, for me, I don't like that look for my fish room. And I didn't want a bunch of wood stands as well. I'm not handy in that regards to set up a rack system to cut the wood and do the dado joints and build it and everything like you see on Ted Judy's channel of how to build racks. So I worked with the company we have here in Michigan called Over the Edge. Rick and Brandon up there run the company, and they manufacture angle iron stands. So I had them build me. This is one of my renovations that I went through in my room when I was using 2-tier store-bought stands. One thing I ran into a lot of problems with, and those of you that have them know what I'm talking about, is you can't really get your hands in your bottom tank. If you set up a 55 on top and a 55 on the bottom, your gap between the bottom of the stand and your top trim of your tank is very small, so you can't get things in and out or catch fish very well. So I worked with them. I knew I at least wanted 8 inches between each tank, and so the top of the tank and the bottom of the next shelf or next tier to hold the tank, the next one. So they manufactured me 3-tier stands for my 40 breeders, my 40 longs. They even manufactured me at the time when I had all those tanks some quadruple 20 long stands. So I use those guys to make all my stands for angle iron. I'm very OCD. I want all my stuff to match for the most part. So all my stands in my fish room are made out of angle iron, except my fry racks that I had a guy custom build me wood stands to hold 15 tanks on each one, and then my one now that has 620 longs had 1810s on it back in the day. So you can go manufactured. I just don't trust them for me. So I feel more safe. I know they're manufactured right. Rick does a great job making tanks or making stands for aquariums. So one thing I've made a mistake in with my power. So I have dedicated circuits that run each wall, and they run a certain number of tanks. I run heaters. I have lights that I run down in my fish room. And I know everybody says some of your fish don't need lights, but they're just for us, which is true. But if I'm down in my fish room, spending several hours down there, I like to have my aquarium lights on to observe my fish better. So in regards to lighting with my room, what I wish I would have done is put a dedicated circuit in that I could just run all my aquarium lights on to put on a timer. So then I could turn them on and off with just one switch or one timer, control them that way. But to get around that, I ended up nowadays with technology, I put in Wi-Fi. So I have Wi-Fi plugs that run all my aquarium lights down there. So I use an app on my phone. I can turn my lights on and off on demand or schedule them as needed to turn on and off. I do run heaters in my fish room, in my tanks. So that's one. Another one, if you're putting a room in, you want to plan your heat source so your electric bill doesn't go crazy when you run your heaters, especially in the wintertime when your basement's cold if it's not insulated that great. So my outlets are all behind my tanks. I have, I think, 7 dedicated circuits down there that were put in when I did my fish room. And I also, we just put another circuit in a couple weeks ago. I had a problem where I think my dehumidifier turned on and it flipped my circuit breaker off that ran my main AL200. So I had a guy come in. We ran electrical. I had an extra circuit, so we ran another 20 amp circuit. So now my linear pump is by itself now, so I don't have to worry about the dehumidifier tripping that circuit. So electrical, I wish I would have put it higher, but I can get to all of it if I need to. Behind my racks, it's a little tricky. If I want to get behind it, you pretty much got to take the rack down. So hopefully I don't have any problems back there after I drill my tanks and put the drains behind there to need to get back there to work with it.
Kind of tying in with the fish room thing, can you kind of walk us through a little bit with regard to kind of your quarantine process? Do you have like a separate rack system that you utilize for that?
All my tanks are separate. Nothing's on a central system or anything. So if I get new fish in, they go in a bare bottom tank. So depending on the size and the number that come in, I utilize the various 40 longs or 75-gallon tanks. I have 30 longs and also my 20 highs or 20 longs I can utilize. So if I'm bringing a fish shipment in, which I just brought in last Tuesday, I brought in 100 fish from a wholesaler that I work with. So all the fish go in bare bottom tanks. They get treated right away with API General Cure for the required amount of treatment. I run through 2 treatments on the fish before I will release them for sale to the general public, just to make sure they're eating, they're healthy, and there's nothing wrong with them before I let them go for sale. So I encourage, and I've got burned before, you need to make sure if you're getting fish in, even if you know the person they're coming from, you need to quarantine your fish, because I learned a lesson with that as well. A buddy of mine got me some fish. They looked healthy. They looked okay. And when I added them in with my fish, within a week, I had a parasite outbreak and ended up losing a whole tank of aquarium, a whole tank of fish. So I never second guess anything. It doesn't matter who it comes from. Not that I don't trust any, the people, your buddies or your friends in the hobby, but I still recommend you quarantine all your fish before they go on your main tanks if you're going to put them with other fish. So for me, I know there's this disagreement among the South and Central cichlid keepers and the African cichlid keepers, but to me, the personality in the African cichlids, the color, the variety that they have, always drew me to them. I fell in love when I first found the frontosa. From that standpoint on, I knew I wanted to keep African cichlids. I don't know that eventually I will probably keep. I like some certain Geophagus species. I'd like to keep some of those in my fish room at one point. I did have some redhead Tapajos, but I never was able to spawn them, so I moved them on to another guy that has them now in a community tank. I do see myself eventually getting more, maybe in the smaller South American cichlids. I don't see myself getting ever into the big central cichlids like your Dovi or your Cynospilums. I don't like to have two fish in a tank and you got to divide it and hopefully they pair off, and that doesn't interest me. I know it interests a lot of people, and I'm not knocking that part. Everybody keeps what they like, and that's what's so great about the hobby is there's a lot of diversity in what people can keep and what fish are out there from a cichlid standpoint. But personally, I'll stick to the Africans and probably some of the smaller South American cichlids down the road. So I have a website, www.cunninghamcichlids.com. My email is josh@cunninghamcichlids.com, so you can always send me an email if you wanted to set something up like that. If you're part of a club, I'm also through the American Cichlid Association speaker program, so if you schedule it through the speaker program, your club will get some money back on the costs for me to come out and speak. Through ZoomEd, they run that program, but there's only so many spots, so that has to be set up well in advance to make sure that there's spots available for your club to bring speakers out for that program. Also on YouTube, I have a YouTube channel under Cunningham Cichlids. If you search YouTube, you'll find my channel. My whole drilling, when I drill my tanks, the whole process is going to be documented. So make a mini series on there, so you can find me on there as well. Facebook, I have a Facebook page, Cunningham Cichlids LLC, and I also have a Facebook group that I started that I'm running auctions and raffles through under Cunningham Cichlids.
Well, thanks so much, Josh, for hopping on here. Thank you, everybody, all the moderators and so forth. And you guys know what's next. As always, stay encouraged. Keep on keeping on. Happy fishing. We'll talk to you guys right back here on the next one.